So my name is Mary Holmes. I live in Cantley, Quebec. It's also the same place that my great-grandparents came to from Ireland. During the Irish famine, our great-grandmother came on her own with her family. They all died on the way here except her, so she was the only one left when she arrived here. The great-grandfather, who became her husband, he came, but we think he came in a family group with his first cousins and so on. And but they all arrived in Cantley. Catherine came up to visit Cantley, but she knew friends in Cantley at the time, and she came up to visit, met William, her husband-to-be, and the rest is history, our history. So Catherine, her maiden name was Timlin. As far as we know, she married Francis O'Boyle in Ireland. They had children. As far as we know, Francis and the children died. She left Ireland with her own sister and her husband and their children. And so they came across the Atlantic. By the time they got to Gros Isle in Quebec, near Quebec City, they were all dead but Catherine. She did tell one story about on the way over, when a family member would die, they would bribe the sailors with biscuits, and they would so they could have a little bit of a wake before the body was disposed of into the sea. And so she came to Quebec City. There's various versions, but she went to the nearest Catholic church to get help. She either worked for them or they helped her, but they helped her get to Kingston, Ontario. We're assuming by steamship. She was there for a little while. She met a group of people who were walking back to Ottawa, and she joined that group, and then she walked back to Ottawa. She eventually got a job as a maid for Nicholas Sparks, who was an Irishman here in Canada, had done very well for himself. And in the midst of all that, she had, as far as we know, she had friends who were living in Cantley. She visited them, we think, and that's how she met her future husband, William Holmes. And so William and Catherine got married in 1848 in September in the Catholic Church in Chelsea, Quebec. We didn't have one in Cantley at that time. And then they settled on the family farm in Wilson's Corners, which is now part of Cantley. And they raised their family, and one of their sons stayed on the farm. He raised his family, who included my father. My father's married and stayed on that farm too, and he raised his family, and now one of my brothers is there with his own children. So the farm even has its own genealogy, and it's really interesting that it's the same family that has stayed there. And it's interesting too that our neighbors up to a certain point were all part of all the same idea that the original families were there, their descendants had stayed on and on. So we were neighbors for generations. So it made doing the family tree a little easier, having it all there together. I've always been really inspired by Catherine and her story. You know, she came here on her own. By the time she got here, she had to, she had to go ahead. And as one of my aunts said, she had to go ahead because she couldn't go back. There was no way of going back to Ireland. There was nothing to go back to. But nevertheless, she did persevere, and she had hardship early in her life, as well as surviving the famine. She had survived her husband dying, her children dying because of it. She married here, and two of her children died as young people. So she wasn't, her suffering didn't stop. But nevertheless, she persevered, and she really wanted to know her descendants to know her story, because she talked about it, and she left evidence, written evidence. She wrote a list of all the grandmothers and the great-grandmothers back about 5 or 6 generations from her. She didn't do the same thing for the men, but she did it for the women. But it was just her strength of character, and she was very dedicated. She was to her church and her religion too, and that, I'm sure, gave her great strength to carry on through everything she had to carry on through. So she's always been a really fine example for myself and for all the other young women in the family of just doing what you have to do and getting on with life,